This morning we are going to try to make our way through 1 Samuel 4, which is actually a really important chapter. There are two scenes in it, so we'll take a look at both scenes, both of which have to do with the Ark of the Covenant. So remember, we've had Samuel called to be a prophet. We have Israel kind of practicing idolatry and religious syncretism. And now chapter 4 kind of focuses in on that reality. So we're going to take a look, first of all, at 4:1 through 11. That's scene 1. And then starting in 12, we get another scene. That's scene 2. So here's scene 1. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went up to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of battle. So that's how things start. And when the people came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh and brought up from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. That little phrase is important. We'll stop and take a look at it in just a minute. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were with the ark of the covenant of God. As soon as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all the people gave a mighty shout, so the earth resounded. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, "What does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid, because they said, "A god has come into the camp," which is true. And they said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves of the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated. And they fled. Every man came to his home, and there was a great slaughter. For 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell. And the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died, in fulfillment of what Samuel had said back in chapter. So let's take a look at scene 1 here, because there's a lot going on. So Samuel sends Israel into battle against the Philistines, and we want to remember now from some of our trip through Joshua. Remember, the Philistines were one part of the Canaanite population that were never conquered, so they're still there, and they're living on these 5 coastal cities along the Mediterranean coastline. So that's kind of like their territory, and now they're pressing in on Israel, and they will continue to do this actually for quite some time into the reign of David. Yeah. Kind of, yeah. Part of it is, although the Philistine territory is actually really right on the coast. Yeah. So let's take a look at what happens here, just sort of like the in terms of how the drama unfolds. So the Israelites go into battle. And the first thing that happens is they're defeated. So the stage 1 of the battle results in defeat. 4,000 men die here. And then the elders of Israel ask this question. It's actually an important question. Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? That is, the elders actually get part of what's going on correct. That is, they realize, right, that the defeat has actually been brought about by God himself. The part that they don't get, which is important too, is why. That is, why has God brought about this defeat? And of course, the defeat actually is God's judgment upon their idolatry and disloyalty to the covenant. That's why. Although the elders don't actually get that far in their inquiry. And so they say, okay, here's what we need to do. What we need to do is we need to bring the Ark of the Covenant here onto the battlefield. And if we do that, that will guarantee us success. In other words, right, it's almost as if the elders of Israel see the Ark of the Covenant as a kind of like uber good luck charm, in effect, right? That's how they're thinking about it. Now, the thing that we want to notice here is, notice here how the elders talk about it. I'm going to say a little bit about this because I think this is really important. So the people of Israel sent to Shiloh and brought from there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of Hosts. So that's one descriptor here, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of Hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. That's the second descriptor, okay? Ark of the Covenant, God's enthroned on the cherubim. So they bring it, and right away there's a sign that things are not right? Because, in effect, right, the two guards of the Ark of the Covenant are, guess who? Hophni and Phinehas. These two guys who are abusing their office as priests, right? They are guarding, quote unquote, the covenant. And the idea, I think, here is, whenever Hophni and Phinehas show up, right, that's a definite sign that things are going bad. That's just kind of like, almost like a dead giveaway. Now, I want to say a word here about the ark, because it's like really important. We just kind of want to think about its role both in the Old Testament, but also its role in the New. So just a little bit of almost like footnote. Remember that we get a description of the Ark of the Covenant in Exodus 25. Moses is instructed in terms of how to make it. And it consists essentially of like two pieces, if you will. One is a wooden chest overlaid with gold. And the idea is that the chest contains the covenant, that is the tablets of the law. And by the way, a number of Old Testament scholars think that we don't have two tablets of the law. Actually, what we have is the law in two different copies. One copy belongs to Israel, and the other copy is God's. And they're both contained in the Ark of the Covenant. That's certainly possible, yeah. I mean, we're not actually told, but yeah. So that's one thing that's in it. And the other thing we want to kind of notice here is something about the ark that is mentioned in Exodus 25, which I think is really important to notice, because it's not just a mere detail. So after Moses is given the instructions on how to make the ark and what is supposed to go into it, in 25:16 we're told, "And you shall put into the ark the testimony that I shall give you." That is, in effect, what we now call the Ten Commandments, right? The testimony, the ark of the testimony. So the ark now is, in effect, right, one meaning of it is it's the visible sign of Israel's covenant with God, right? To remind both Israel and also God that this covenant exists. And then, this is the second piece, this is in 25:17, we now have another kind of thing that's added on to the Ark of the Covenant, and that's this. "And you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, and 1 cubit and a half its breadth. And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work shall you make them. On the 2 ends of the mercy seat, make 1 cherub on one end and 1 cherub on the other. Of one piece with the mercy seat, you shall make the cherubim on its 2 ends." So now we have this gold cover that sits on the top of the ark, and it's got a cherub on one end and a cherub on the other, and their wings are outstretched kind of like over the top of the mercy seat. And then we're given like a really important detail here in 25:22, which is really important, that comes right at the end. "There I will meet with you, And from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you about what I will give to you in commandment for the people of Israel. Yes, there's a Tupperware jar with manna in there as well. Yeah. Right. And also Aaron's staff is in there too, that was used in the Exodus. So just think about this for just a minute. This is just a way of kind of not letting go of what the ark means, right? So meaning number one, it's the visible sign of Israel's covenant with God. On the other hand, it all has a second meaning, and this is important too. The Ark of the Covenant, in effect, is also the earthly analog of God's heavenly throne. So that when Moses approaches it, it is as if he is in God's throne room. And there, he and God actually meet. Not like metaphorically or spiritually or something like that, but rather Moses is, and also Aaron too, right? They're actually in the presence of God when they approach the Ark of the Covenant. Now, two other things about the Ark that we'll just want to kind of think about, just to kind of build out the picture, and then we'll go back to the story. In Romans 3:25, Paul says something interesting about Christ. He refers to Christ using the same Greek word that the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, uses for the mercy seat. It's the word hilasterion. That is, in Romans 3:25, Paul describes Christ as the mercy seat, the place where God and humankind meet. So that's an important thing too. And then in Hebrews 9, we have a description of the whole temple and everything that went on in it as being fulfilled in Christ, including the Ark of the Covenant. So that's kind of like filling out the picture, right? That is, the importance of the Ark of the Covenant doesn't just cease once we end the Old Testament. Its meaning actually carries on in the New, and we have New Testament writers talking about it as a way of talking about Christ and his role in this kind of larger picture. Now, what's going on? What's going on in this scene? That is, in effect, I think the question here is, what is the wrong thing about bringing the Ark of the Covenant onto the battlefield? And it seems to be this. The Ark is not only the symbol of God's sovereignty and authority, right? It's also a symbol, a representation of Israel's covenant with God, which she's broken. So notice what's going on. We're going to bring the Ark of the Covenant here to kind of maybe magically dispel the Philistines, but it contains a covenant that we ourselves are breaking. That is, there's something wrong here, right? And the wrong thing here seems to be this, that there's an important lesson that needs to be learned here, and that is, covenant doesn't mean that God simply blesses everything his people do. Covenant doesn't mean that God simply adds his amen to everything his people decide to do. In effect, right, we have the covenant is a representation of what the people of Israel actually have broken. And so it's not surprising that in scene 2 we find that the covenant is captured by the Philistines. Now, the reason why I think this is important to say, right, is that there's an important lesson that's going on here. It's a lesson, of course, that the writers of the history that constitutes 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings realize that Israel never learned. And that is that the purpose of Israel, right, is to be faithful to the covenant above and beyond everything else. The problems start kind of arising, right, when they simply want to sort of be like a nation like all the others. That's when the problems start to hit, and that's when everything occurs. That is, another way to say that is that the Ark of the Covenant is an important reminder that Israel actually is only a people insofar as they live into the covenant that they've been given by God and worship him. If that doesn't happen, really, the people don't really exist. And that's just another way of saying that God's not giving them sort of like an unconditional blessing, right? Do whatever you want and I'll back you up. That's not what's going on here. And that's probably one of the lessons that has to be learned here in scene 1. Let's take a quick look at scene 2. Now we have the results of the battle are now being brought back to the people of Israel, and especially to Eli. Eli's watching this, on cable news about what's happening on the battlefield. And I think what happens here is also like really important. So here it is. This is 1 Samuel 4:12. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day. So this is where the arks come from, right? This is where Eli is. And his clothes torn and dirt on his head. So, right, this is obviously, right, not a good sign. Okay, the messenger arrives back home. His clothes are torn. He's got dirt on his head. He's obviously been in battle. It's been like a ways back. And clearly, right, he's got like bad news. And sure enough, he does. When he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road, watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. Interesting enough, he doesn't seem to be all that concerned about the two sons. It's like, well, if they don't survive battle, well. Anyway, and when the man came into the city, he told the news. All the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" When the man turned and hurried, he came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. And the man said to Eli, "I am he who has come from the battle. I fled from the battle today." And he said, "How did it go, my son?" He who brought the news answered, said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark has been captured." As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God had been captured by the Philistines, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, and her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women attended her and said, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer or pay attention. And when she turned to the child, and when she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." So it's a pretty awful day, right? So ark captured, Hophni and Phinehas dead, Eli's daughter-in-law is giving birth, she dies in childbirth, and she names her son Ichabod. The glory has departed from Israel. So it's not a good day. Let's take a look at a couple things here, though, that I think we want to take note of, that I think are important to think about. So Eli is sitting near the city gate in his seat, and this isn't just like a chair. It's not like a folding chair or something like that. He sits by the gate. This is the judgment seat. Remember, Eli's both a priest and a judge, so this is the judgment seat at the city gate where court takes place. And the moment that the messenger brings the news that the Ark of the Covenant has been captured, Eli falls backwards off the chair and breaks his neck. And we're told the reason why he died is that he was old and heavy. So, watch your weight. No, actually, there's something really important going on here that we want to kind of pay, I think, close attention to. Thing number one, right? We just want to realize, although this is kind of like maybe like foreign to us, in this culture, being heavy is a sign of status, right? Because food's not like in abundance. Okay, it's not like, there's like, not like a Publix on every corner and you just, drive up and roll your cart in and fill it up and take it home. So in this world, right, there are very few people who are actually like heavy. And they're the people who like have influence and power and wealth, and we actually still have a little bit of this today, right? We sometimes, in like the political world, right, we talk about someone being a heavy, someone who has like a lot of influence, right? So we're still kind of operating with that way of thinking about things. But there's another thing here that we also want to take a look at, and that's this. It's interesting that the word heavy here that's used to describe Eli is actually the same word that's used to designate God's glory. It's the Hebrew word kavod. And it means something like this. That is, the glory of God, right, is understood here to be something that's weighty. That is, in the Old Testament, I think this is really helpful. In the Old Testament, God is not thought of as kind of like this ethereal, spiritual thing that kind of like floats around, but rather the presence of God brings with it a kind of weight. In the presence of God, right, you can sort of feel the weight of the divine reality pressing down upon you. And so the idea seems to be here, right, that we have two different kinds of weight, right? There's the weight of Eli, and there's also the weight of God. And those are two very different things. And so, I think that, as you're reading this story along, right, there's a sense, right, in which we have a little bit of sympathy for Eli, right? He wasn't like the best person. Certainly he wouldn't be like my first nominee for a judge or a priest or something like that. But we do have a sense of maybe like slightly some kind of sympathy for him. And now he just, falls over, he breaks his neck, and he's gone, his sons are dead. So God has fulfilled the word that he spoke through Samuel of clearing Eli and his family away, and now they're kind of like out of things. Right, yeah, we're told that she was upset about the capture of the ark. Yeah. So I want us to, we can actually probably get into chapter 5, and I'll just kind of set things up and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail tomorrow, or next Sunday. So this is kind of like the first part of the adventure, but there's another part. So we've seen one aspect of the ark, right? Don't think that you can just simply run, grab the ark, and bring it into your battle, and it'll magically sort of give you victory, especially if you're not being faithful. That's not how things work. The Philistines are about to learn something else about the ark. I'll actually read the first part of 1 Samuel 5 to you. So the Philistines get the ark, and once again, we just want to kind of notice here, right? In this world, when you win a victory over someone, right, one of the things that you would want to do is either A, destroy their temples, or kind of rob the images of their gods. That's a sign that your God's been victorious over theirs, right? You may remember that at the end of the plagues on Egypt, remember God sends those plagues, and it's not coincidental that each plague actually is directed to a certain aspect of Egypt that's personified by an Egyptian god. That is, the battle isn't just God sending like random punishments on Egypt. The battle is God sending punishments on the gods, quote unquote, of Egypt. And so that's the Philistines here believe that they're now going to capture the ark. They'll take it back, and it'll be like their trophy. So here's the first part of 1 Samuel 5. When the Philistines captured the ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. So that's one of the Philistine cities. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon, the sort of chief Philistine god, and set it up beside Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face forward on the ground before the ark of the Lord. So notice what's happened here. Here's the other side of this. The Philistines take the ark they've captured, they bring it into the temple of Dagon, they set it beside the statue or image of Dagon, and are feeling like really self-congratulatory, right? We showed them. We got the ark here, we're really something. The next morning, they come into the temple, and the statue of Dagon has been toppled from his, whatever it was, throne, resting place, and now it's face down before the ark. And so this has to be quickly corrected, right, before opening hours, and anybody sees it. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early on the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying out off on the threshold. So the next day, Dagon once again is face down on the ground, only this time his head's broken off and he's missing a hand, kind of like the Venus de Milo, only it's now Dagon. Now, we want to kind of think about something I think that's really important here, right? That is, the ark can't be misused. That's what we learned from the Philistine battlefield. But the other thing that we're learning now here too is that it also can't be toyed with. And the reason why it can't be toyed with is, and I think this is really important too, remember we're living in a culture and a world where gods kind of like have jurisdictions, right? That is, every god kind of has their jurisdiction. It's almost like, political or like law enforcement jurisdictions, right? So every god. The idea here is that one of the things that makes the God of Israel unique is he doesn't have a jurisdiction. He's the creator. His authority is not limited or bounded by space or time. The other thing here that we also want to notice, and this is where we'll close, there's a really interesting passage in Isaiah 40 that I actually think speaks directly to what's happening here. And we want to kind of think about it because it's an important part of the Old Testament's theology. It's Isaiah 40, 15 and following. This is a kind of meditation on idolatry. God is talking to the people of Israel, and he's wanting to remind them, right, look, I'm the creator. Nothing's beyond the scope of my power to do. And so he's trying to get the people to see this when they either don't want to or can't. And so here's part of what Isaiah says. Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are there beasts enough for a burnt offering. Notice what God's saying. God's saying, you know what? Don't think that, a little sacrifice here, a little thing there is like going to somehow change me. You could take every cedar in Lebanon, you could take like a whole forest and use that as like firewood for a sacrifice, and you could take every animal in the world as a burnt offering, and it'd be nothing. That's an indication of who I am. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compare with him? An idol? A craftsman casts it. A goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts it with silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood, and that will rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman and sets up an idol that will not move. Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in, who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Right. Right, yeah. Yeah, so the contrast here is something we just want to keep in our minds as we'll explore 5 more next week. Notice the contrast here. The contrast here is between God's quote unquote, which someone has made out of something, wood or stone, as contrasted to the God of Israel, who's the creator and can look upon his creation and who can look upon like the most powerful people in it and see them in effect as nothing. That's what the Philistines are being reminded of here. And of course, obviously, right, that's also a lesson that Israel needs to learn as well. We'll see how they learn that as chapter 5 progresses.